NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
What is going on, Jason?
Got a fun show idea going on. This one was, it's really interesting because it's very much a capsule in time that I don't think really got a lot of attention at the time, and certainly, it hasn't been looked upon since. But we are going to take a look at the NBA's silver anniversary team announced in 1971.
Yeah, we've done. I mean, obviously we did our own, redoing of the 50 greatest players and whatnot. And I think that's the one that everybody kind of remembers is that, the 50th anniversary, that 50 team. You still see B-roll of guys with that. People are talked about that when you go to Wikipedia pages. Like one of the top headlines is this guy was named one of the NBA's 50 greatest players or whatnot. But you really never hear about the silver anniversary team. I'll be honest, even before we started doing the notes for this, I don't know that I knew a whole lot about this team. So I think, like you said, exactly, it was something that was kind of lost to time. So I think it's going to be a great topic to kind of go over and shine some light on these guys.
Yeah, and really it's more when we have looked at it, it's been more in the context of like, okay, well, here's the guys who picked for the 25th anniversary, and here's the guys for the 50th anniversary.
Right.
Yeah, and before we even get into it, we need to deal with the issue of the fact that 1971 really isn't the NBA's 25th anniversary. That's what's on the official record. We go back to the
what? Come on.
I know.
Lie about that? Come on.
Well, yeah. So
they're going to ignore an entire predecessor league? No, they would never do that. Come on.
They would never do that. Yes. So yeah, the whole issue of the fact that the combination of the BAA and the NBL is better understood, I think, to be a merger rather than an absorption. But the powers that be came afterward. There seems to be some sort of intentional effort at changing the record to make it seem as though the BAA was the dominant league and the NBL is an afterthought, and those records are not officially part of the NBA's history, whereas the BAAs are. So we've gone on and on about that before, but I feel like that needs to be said before we make any further discussion of this issue.
Yeah, so just keep in mind that 25th anniversary by the NBA's way of their history, like their sort of crafting of history versus the NBL, which the NBL established in 1937, of course, so that changes a lot of the different times and whatnot, because the BAA was 1946, so it's definitely a dramatically different. There's about 10 years or so that are not being accounted here. So yeah, 25th anniversary from the founding of the BAA as opposed to the NBA or whatever. So a little way to kind of however you want to do it. But yeah, as you said, we've had many shows about that in the past, so just to keep that in mind for the context of this.
Absolutely, yes. And this is an interesting look though at where the NBA stood in 1971. The fact that the league had established itself at a point both in just how long it had been around, even if you go back to 1950, and the fact that it was successful enough at this point where you had this legacy and tradition, and you were at a point where we've gone beyond being in these really small arenas in the 50s and getting basically no attention to we're not by far not the most successful league in the world, and even still in some ways being overshadowed by college basketball, but we are a league that has established itself and has tradition and has a enough of a place at the table where we're strong and powerful at this point, or more powerful anyway than we had been.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. And of course we'd see, bigger times coming in the 80s and the 90s or whatever, but the 70s felt like the first time, especially the early 70s, where they finally had started to get some sort of breath of air in the American sports scene, because really, they existed in the 50s and the 60s or whatnot, but like you're saying, we're talking little towns, we're talking, cities that you would never think would have NBA teams that had NBA teams and, had success in those cities or whatnot. But yeah, we're playing small armories still. We're still playing very small arenas. We're obviously, as you said, secondary to college basketball and secondary to pretty much every sport, every other major sport in the country. So yeah, the early 70s finally felt like the first time where they were able to kind of breathe a little bit, and they had, obviously a great team in New York. They had some stars. They had Boston and the legacy there. So it was finally starting to get into the public conscience, the NBA, and it finally felt, like you said, for the first time, like it was one of the real dominant sport leagues of the country.
Yeah, and at this point, the Knicks had won the championship in 1970, which, brought a lot of attention to the league, beating the Lakers in 7 games, the Willis Reed game and all that. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had joined the league. He was the next great big man, the next great star who was going to carry things forward. There was a lot of potential at this point of an NBA-ABA merger. There was some legal hurdles to it, but they had started playing exhibition games against each other, and there was some excitement along that. Right at this point when this was announced, which was December 11th, 1971, the Lakers were in the middle stages of what would be their 33-game winning streak. They actually had, I believe, tied the record on December 10th at 20 and would break the record on the 12th at 21. So a lot of excitement going on. There was some predicting that pro basketball could be the sport of the 70s like the NFL was in the 60s. As we know, there would be some stumbles ahead, although I do think that promise eventually came along in the 80s. It just took longer than people expected.
Absolutely.
So one major thing that you see on this list is that there's a decision to not include active players. So it takes a lot of really important players in the NBA's history out of consideration. So Wilt Chamberlain is not included, Oscar Robertson not included, Jerry West, Elgin BaylorA. I think that these would be no-brainers to be on this team. These are among the top 10, 11 guys in terms of win shares of all time in NBA history. In fact, Wilt and Oscar were 1 and 2. A few other guys who, would have been in contention but not included, and a few names that may be surprising in terms of their win share ranks all time in the league history at this point. Bailey Howell, 7th in all time in win shares. Win share is not a perfect metric, but I think does give some sense of, what career, value that they had provided throughout their career. A little redundant there, but Walt Bellamy also there, 10th all time in win shares. Hal Greer 13th, Jerry Lucas 20th. So, it does feel a little odd to not have some of these guys on the team, and then you see someone like Bill Russell, Sam Jones, who had just retired, obviously belong on the list, but it's weird to have them on the list and not Wilt and Oscar, I guess. But then again, you also get some spotlights to some of the forgotten early players that we'll talk about here. So I don't really necessarily know how I feel about the fact that maybe if you'd had you had to be retired for 3 or 4 years kind of rule might have made it better, but I don't know. It's a little weird either way.
It is tricky, yeah. And that's we talked about that when we talked about the original 50th anniversary team, that it felt kind of weird that there were current players that were on there, but you kind of knew Shaq was probably going to remain one of the 50 greatest of all time, or at that even early in his career was still going to probably be one of those guys. And obviously your Pippins and your Jordans or whatnot had obviously established that already. So it didn't feel so weird to have them on there, but it also I would have been fine if they didn't have any of the current players on there. Then again, if we go back and look at this and we look at the 50 greatest players, in 1997 or whatever, and it's where's Michael Jordan? Where's Scott? It would have felt weird. So I don't know. I don't know the right way to do it. I think there really probably isn't a right way, but it is a little tricky that, like you said, guys like a Russell and a Sam Jones are on there, but Wilt, just by virtue of not retiring yet, is not on there, where it's very obvious that he was. But I don't know. I'm fine with it, because I feel like the declaration of this team is not necessarily as much as the 50 great, because that one, the 50th anniversary team, was very much branded as the 50 greatest players of all time or whatever, whereas this one was just celebrating the 25th anniversary, the quote 25th anniversary of the NBA. So I don't mind it. I don't know if there's a perfect way. I wouldn't bother me if those guys were on there, even though they were still current players, but it doesn't bother me that they're not. I think there's still a decent way to discuss them. And like you said, it highlights some of the other guys too that maybe wouldn't have gotten their due had some of these guys that were currently playing still had gotten on the list. So I don't know. I'm kind of in between on it.
Sure. So the selection process, there was a selection committee of NBA luminaries, which we'll talk about in just a minute. They picked 25 nominees, and the criteria basically was you had to complete your career and you had to have at least one All-NBA selection. Could be first or second team, but you had to be on the All-NBA team at least once. And then the 25 nominees then were there was a vote taken by players, I believe active or retired, who had at least been on one first-team All-NBA up to that point. And then from that vote, there were 10 players who were selected, 2 centers, 4 forwards, and 4 guards. We'll get into the team in a little bit. We'll talk about the selection committee first, but just some notes on the team. Bill Russell was the only unanimous selection of the team, and only players as I mentioned, only players who had completed their careers and been named All-NBA at least once were eligible. And also, only 4 players on the 20th anniversary team were selected into the 30th anniversary team 10 years later. And then 8 out of the 10 players who were ultimately selected for the team were selected onto the NBA 50 greatest of all time in 96. We'll get into who that was once we announce the actual team itself.
Absolutely. Selection committee, I think, is a pretty interesting part as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, we'll kind of go through some of the players, or excuse me, well, they were, some of them at
some were, yeah.
At one point were players, but coaches and executives and owners who had been, who were responsible for selections here. I would say the overall theme is, one, that these were guys who had been following the league since basically the BAA's inception in 1946. So they had seen it all. They had seen everything. They were certainly qualified to select this team. However, they all, of course, come in with certain biases, whether it's for their franchises and even more importantly, probably come with the view that the BAA was truly the league and that the NBL was the not important league. So that's
sure
worth noting here, absolutely. But
yeah, for sure. Most of the guys have ties to one team, and most of those teams have some roots in the BAA. Most of them. I mean, some don't, but yeah, there's guys that are definitely synonymous just with one franchise, either they coached with them, played with them, or own them. And yeah, as you said, almost to a man, every single one of them have roots in the BAA. And I don't know if anybody even, maybe one or two, have any minor roots in the NBL, and that could be another big issue, as well as you mentioned at the top.
Right, yes. So first we have Red Auerbach. He was the GM and former coach of the Celtics, of course, and longtime executive. It had been began coaching in the BA actually in its first season with the Washington Capitals. Also had a year with the Tri-Cities Blackhawks before making his way to the Celtics and the dynasty that would be created there. So obviously longtime roots in the BAA. Then we have Ned Irish, who was the president of the Knicks since the BAA began, and was a famous promoter of college basketball in Madison Square Garden starting into the 30s. In fact, was pretty instrumental in the growth of both college and pro basketball eventually. And yeah, a lot to his life and career here, but he was another guy. And then we've got the mogul. I think you should take this one, Rich.
Yeah, Eddie Gottlieb. So he, interestingly enough, and I don't know if I knew this until I just looked it up right now. The NBA Rookie of the Year award is still named after Eddie Gottlieb. So did not know that, but now I do. Sole person in charge of the NBA scheduling until the day he died in 1981, which I found pretty fascinating as well. It's an impossible job, but it was done by one man for a while. His legacy dates back to the South Philadelphia Hebrew Association, then the ABL, BAA, and nearly all major early leagues except for the NBL, of course, because who cares about the NBL? We'll just ignore them. But he won 7 titles as coach of the Philadelphia Spaz in the ABL and 1 BAA championship as a coach in 1946-47, led by Jumpin' Joe Fulks and his innovative jump shot, of course. But yeah, Eddie Gottlieb, big ties to the Warriors, the entire Warriors franchise as early as they began. And yeah, a lot of early stuff in the NBA as well. Also, Haskell Cohen was the next guy as well, and I think he's an interesting one as well. PR director of the NBA from 1950 to 1969, creator of the NBA All-Star Game. We mentioned that before in prior shows, but the big reason for the NBA All-Star Game was to change public perception after the infamous college basketball point shaving scandal. They wanted to at least say, hey, basketball's on the up and up, we promise. And he wanted to do this All-Star Game. Nobody else in the league really wanted to do it except for the Celtics. The Celtics said, yeah, we'll do it. So they funded the game, they hosted it, and it was a tremendous success. And obviously it still exists to this day, so it worked quite well. Also, Haskell Cohen, he helped create Parade Magazine's annual high school All-American teams for football and basketball, and those are still, I believe, pretty prominent for high school basketball rankings and whatnot. So definitely a good background there for Haskell Cohen, and then Eddie Gottlieb as well.
Yeah. And then we have Danny Biazzoni. He was the founding owner of the Syracuse Nationals, one of the largest advocates for the shot clock. Some controversy behind the shot clock because he's often credited as being the creator of it, but really it was his general manager, Leo Ferris, who came up with the idea of dividing up the number of seconds in a 48-minute game, which is 2,880, dividing it by 120, which is total shot taken by team, and which leading to the 24 seconds. So, really the idea that a good game should have each team basically having 60 shots. So, but he was certainly an innovator, a promoter for the Syracuse Nationals, one of the early founders of the league. Also helped convince the NBA to adopt the backcourt foul rule in 1953. So certainly an innovator in that respect, and helped the steer the ship for the Nationals despite having a limited financial resources. I believe his primary income came from running a bowling alley.
Yeah, that's the good old days of the NBA when you could run a bowling alley and own a little team. But we always find the shot clock thing kind of funny and we've still stuck with it, and I guess it's fine. But you know what I mean? Like when you realize how it came about and that it just was like, all right, well, 24 seconds, let's go with it. Like I guess his reasoning behind it isn't horrible, and I guess it's worked out fine. But I just find it like very funny that in this era where like everything is just broken down and thought of so meticulously, and it's just like, 24 seconds, whatever, go with it. Like it's just become. Yeah. But I mean, it's fine. I think it works. Like, it doesn't not work, but it's just like, okay, like we haven't, like, at no point did anybody say, hey, this Pisoni guy was just like coming up with numbers. Why don't we try to figure out something else? But it's just like, nah, we'll go with it. It's very fascinating in that sense, because it actually it works, and it's similar to like a lot of sports rules, like baseball. Like the space between bases is just like, it just happened. It's like, all right, whatever, yeah, that's the space between bases. Like, all right, cool. It's like, all right, whatever, and then everybody just follows it like blindly for the rest of the time. But it's fine. The 24 seconds is fine. Does it not work? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And one guy who does have some NBL roots is Lester Harrison, who is the owner and was once coach of the Rochester franchise, and was on the committee, in fact, that was part of brokering the merger between the BAA and the NBL that created the NBA. And he retired after the team as a coach after the Rochester had 5 NBA divisional championships, won the 1951 NBA championship. Also, the Royals won the 1946, I believe, NBL championship as well. So they were powerhouse in both leagues, and maybe the one franchise that sort of gets a little bit hurt because the fact that the NBL stuff isn't considered.
Absolutely. No, for sure. He's definitely one that falls there. Fred Zollner, Mr. Pro Basketball. He founded the Fort Wayne Zollner Pistons with his sister Janet. He won an NBA title, 2 NBL titles in 1944 and 45, so another NBL guy here. Reached the NBA Finals in 1954 and 55. And it was at his kitchen table where the NBL and BAA merger happened. Also, he's noted for purchasing a DC-3 in 1953, and he was the first owner to fly his players to games, except there's one funny story where he flew his players but forgot his coach, because his coach got on a train while the rest of his players got on a plane, and believe it or not, the plane got there first. The train was a little bit later than the plane. So that's I know it's shocking revelation here that planes go faster than trains, but there was a good example of that as well. And the NBA's Western Conference Championship is named after Fred Zollner, which I find hilarious because, of course, it's in Detroit. But at a time, Detroit was very west for the NBL, the NBL and the NBA, so it makes perfect sense that the man synonymous with Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Detroit, the NBA's Western Conference Championship, is named in his honor. Even though the Detroit Pistons, as far as we've known in our lives, have been in the Eastern Conference. But hey, that's how it was back in the day. So
sure, hey, it's funny how things land. Yes. Next, Ben Kerner. He was the co-founder and owner of the Hawks franchise. Actually, another guy who has the NBL roots. And anyway, he did make a pretty good call in hiring Red Auerbach to coach his team in 1949, but not less smart was the decision to trade players without consulting Red, and then Red ended up leaving to go to the Celtics, and there was a long rivalry where between Kerner and Auerbach over various situations, especially when the Hawks and the Celtics battled each other in finals in the late 50s. Kerner also was famous for drafting Bob Cousy, sending him to Chicago, and then the Stags ended up being they ended up folding, and Cousy ended up going to the Celtics, where he had a legendary career. Also made not the best decision involving Bill Russell trading his rights to the Celtics, and that's not so great for his. Also, famously, in the 1957 finals, Kerner and Auerbach got into a competition with each other on the court before the game over a dispute over the height of the basket, and Auerbach ended up punching Ben Kerner down. So, fun early days of the NBA.
Yeah, and I don't know why Auerbach had to punch him. I mean, he's got a lot over on old Kerner there. But obviously, true. As the Hawks were still a good team and a good franchise as well. Won a title with Bob Pettit. Obviously, the Cliff Hagan trade we've talked about for Bill Russell made sense at the time. Yeah, in hindsight, not great, but it worked pretty well. And the Hawks were good with Cliff Hagan, just not as good as they were or may have been with Bill Russell. But it all kind of worked out pretty well. But yeah, he really should have stopped dealing with the bosses. Like when Red called, you just hang the phone up, Ben.
Sure,
just hang it up. It's probably not going to work well for you.
Yeah, he was infamous for his impatience with coaches, because he went through something like 11 in 10 years where when Bob Pettit was playing. So yeah, not the best.
Fred Schaus, I believe, is our next guy here. He played for the Pistons and the Knicks. He was later GM and coach of the Lakers. He guided the Lakers to 7 consecutive playoff appearances and 4 Western Conference championships in 5 years before moving to the front office. And he was still pretty active in the league. I mean, a lot of these other guys we mentioned are either just kind of barely active or had stopped being real active a few years prior. Fred's still going. I mean, he is still coaching, I believe, or at least still actively in the front office by the time this team came.
He was in the front office at that point. He had was not coach, but he was in the front office.
Okay, so he was still, but only a few years removed from being a coach or whatever. So he's still like pretty active in the NBA. So it's kind of interesting to see him in here. But played has background with the Pistons and the Knicks, as well as with the Lakers as well for Fred Schayes.
Yes, and then Bob Feerick. We'll get into him more later.
Yes.
But he played for the Washington Capitals. Was later the coach for the Caps and the San Francisco Warriors. Also, at the time, was in the Warriors front office. Twice on the All-BA first team. And interestingly enough, is going to we're going to spoil it here, but he is included as a finalist on the NBA 25th anniversary team, and was only one of the two members nominated who are not in the Basketball Hall of Fame. He's stands out very much on being on this team, although we dive into it a little bit later, you can see the merits of his selection. But the fact that he is on the selection committee and is on the silver anniversary team and is probably the least famous member of that team, it raises a few eyebrows, I would say.
Certainly, no, we'll talk about him a little bit later, but he seems like one of the least accomplished guys to be on the selection committee, and also one of the least accomplished guys to be on the team as well. But hey, I don't know if those two things are related, but whatever, Hey, maybe he's a nice guy. Maybe
probably a nice guy.
He probably picked up all the bar tabs, and you know what? Fuck, if that's the case, then you can be on the team. Why not?
Sure, why not? It's this. So, diving into the silver anniversary team itself. So, as we mentioned, there are 10 players who made the final team, and we have Bob Pettit, who we're going to just kind of go through their ranks at the time in win shares and any other notable stats at the time. He was 5th all time in win shares in 1971. He played for 10 years, was on the All NBA team 11 times, including 10 times the first team. Also was twice MVP. We've dove into Bob Pettit a lot before, but obviously one of the greats of all time. No question he belongs on this team. Then next we have Dolph Schayes, played for 15 years, was 4th in win shares all time in 1971. He was 12 times on the All-NBA team, 6 on the first team, 6 on the second team. One of his first teams was a tie, so I don't know. I guess he was on the half on the first team that year, but I don't know. But But anyway, nevertheless, a very good accomplishment for Dolph.
I don't know about the half tie. I don't know how do we declare it? Like, I don't want to give him just half credit for that, but I don't want to give him full one credit. So I don't know. I don't know. Is he like tie goes? I mean, come on, figure it out.
So
play a game of horse or something and settle it. Or I don't know.
There you go. There you go. That's a good idea. Yeah. So 5.5 first and 6.5 second. Do we go there? I don't
messy.
know how
that's messy. I don't know.
That's we'll just go ahead and give him the whole first. Why
sure.
not?
We'll do it.
Yeah. Yes. So Paul Arizin, and he played from 51 to 62, but he missed 2 years because of duty in the Marines. Despite a relatively short career, was still 8th all time in win shares as in 1971. Was 3 times on the first team, 1 time on the second team. Obviously, would have had more probably first teams, or if he had not missed those 2 years of his prime. He was 3rd in points when he retired in 1962. His nickname was Pitchin' Paul, and he was known as a jump shot pioneer along with his teammate Joe Fulks, who we'll get into in a minute. Led the NBA in points and in field goal position twice, and then led the Warriors to a championship 56 along with Neil Johnston and Tom Gola, other notable top 25 nominees. Also we should say that PER and win shares are 48. His numbers are not as good there. They're only 18th in PER and 13th in win shares are 48, but they were not available for players pre-1952, so that would obviously skew things for the very early part of his career, and there's going to be guys further down if we get into those stats where they're not going to be very reliable, which is why we're mostly talking about win shares here. Yeah,
it's going to be tricky, and that again, like we always said, win shares is kind of a messy stat, but it's one of the better ones for historic players, so that's a big reason why we, for better or for worse, I don't think it's a horrible stat. I know there are better ones, but it's a big reason why we use it, because it's the one that's most readily available for certain players of certain eras, so that's why.
Sure, yes. So another guy here, Joe Fulks, who played from 47 to 54 from the very beginning of the BAA. In 1971, only 98th in win shares and 237th in PER, but again, because basically those were only available to the end of his career, and he had a big drop-off in his last couple years of his career. That skews things, but still, 3-time first All-NBA, 1-time second. In fact, he was only 25, or he was not only 25, but he was 25 when he first joined the BAA after 4 years in the Marines. So he may have been able to start his pro basketball career earlier if it not had been for the war. Of course, he would have been in the NBL, not the BA, since it did not exist yet. But he is best known for being one of the first jump shooters in basketball, and among the handful of players who really popularized that, the first to really popularize it in the pros. Was the top offensive player in the BAA when his first couple years. Set the league scoring record 4 times, including he had 63 points in 1949, which remained the league record for 10 years until Elgin BaylorA broke it. In the 47 season, he averaged 23.1 points per game. Bob Feerick was second in the league with 16.8 points per game. Bob Feerick appearing again, notable name.
Star of the show, Bob Feerick. There you go.
Yeah, he is the star of the show. Yeah. Obviously, Bob Feerick, huge draw for casual listeners.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah. No, we're definitely going to use him
as
the. Yeah, we're going to use him as the featured image, and I'm going to say Bob Feerick and the rest of the NBA 25th anniversary team on the post at Fansided, because that'll definitely get the old hashtag clicks. For sure.
Absolutely.
The kids love Bob Feerick.
They do. They love him very much, which is why he was on the selection committee, clearly.
Exactly, yes. NBA 2K, I mean, you can't go online without people, trying to play, as Bob Feerick. So, yeah, he's certainly taken over the park and the playgrounds of the nation.
Yes, absolutely. So he averaged 26.2 points per game in a BA Finals win in 47 over the Stags. The next year, averaged 23.5 points per game in the Finals loss to the original Baltimore Bullets. And was in the top 2 in points per game in his first 3 seasons. He did, however, have a career field goal percentage of only 30%. Now, this was in an era in which field goal percentages were very low compared to what they are now. Although 30%, even during that era, was not particularly good. So.
Not great. Yeah, you can innovate the jump shot, but he wasn't great at making the jump shot, which is fine.
Well,
that's cool.
He made it at an incredibly high rate. He was maybe the Iverson of his time in terms of just it checked up a lot of shots and was an exciting scorer, but the field goal percentage was a little bit of an issue for him. He had fewer tattoos though. Probably some from being in the Marines, I would guess,
but fewer. Yeah. Yes, fewer. Yeah. Also wore a headband and an arm sleeve though, so he was very similar in that sense. But but
the cornrows were an unfortunate choice though. Yeah, that was not a good idea. Yeah, that was poor. So yes. So, Rich, do you want to take the next few players? I think these are
this guy, you may have heard of him, but William Russell played from 1957 to 1969. It looks like here, 3rd in win shares, 28th in PR, 10th in win shares per 48. I think a 3-time All NBA first team, 8-time second team, 5-time MVP. Oh yeah, he was the only unanimous selection on the team as well. It's Bill Russell, of course. You put Bill Russell on the goddamn team, of course. Yeah, you can't have the team without Bill Russell, and he was obviously unanimous, so that made a lot of sense. So we've talked a lot about Bill Russell. We don't have to talk about Bill Russell again. We have a Russellmania series if you're really curious about learning more about Bill Russell. So go check that out in our archives. Next we have George Mikan. Played from 1948 to 1956. 1971, he ranked 9th in win shares, 2nd in PR, and 3rd in win shares per 48. 6-time All-NBA first team. Don't really need to give you too much detail about George Mikan as well. He's one of the innovators of pro basketball, and a guy who I just recently found out has a statue not far from where I live, so I'm going to go and take a photo one of these days. He's in Joliet, because I know that he's from Joliet, Illinois, and we were driving by. We did a tour of the old abandoned Joliet prison, which is pretty fun. It was like around Halloween or whatever, and we're driving by, and I was in a rush to get home. I had to do something, and I look, and I'm like, is that a George Mikan statue? I just drove by. I'm like, it is. Like, what the hell? So I got to go back there one of these days and get a picture in front of this George Mikan statue. Because I didn't know it was only like 20 minutes from my house. So I got to go do that. All right, it's Bob Cousy. You probably heard of him, 1951 to 1963, and also in 1970, but we can just kind of let the 1971 go. 1971 ranks win shares 16th, 17th in PR, 42nd in win shares per 48. He was one of our interesting cases when we were talking about the 50 greatest players. But at this time, he was no doubt on this team. 10-time All-NBA first team, 2-time All-NBA second team, and 1-time NBA MVP. So that's Bob Cousy there. Then we'll do Bill Sharman again. These are all players that you're probably familiar with, so I don't have to get into a ton of details. 1951 to 1961 for Bill Sharman. In 1971, he ranked 18th in win shares, 32nd in PER, and 19th in win shares per 48. 4-time All-NBA first team and 3-time All-NBA second team. So those are guys that felt very much like no doubters, guys that are in some ways some of the better players. I mean, obviously Russell and Mikan, innovators of the game, one of the top, at that time maybe contention for the top players of all time. Then Bob Cousy, of course, one of the greatest guards of all time, and then Bill Sharman as well, one of the greatest guards. So these guys all felt pretty unanimous and pretty obvious and pretty easy.
Yeah, and Sharman, of course, and Cousy, backcourt mates with the Celtics. We already have 3 Celtics on this team at all. I mean, Sharman, I think, would have been one of the guys who would have been bumped off the list had they included, current players, because, West probably would have replaced him. Or
right.
And not that he definitely has a very strong case to be on this list. And it was obviously he was one of the great shooters of his day. Probably a little bit like Reggie Miller of his day. I think that would probably be in terms of the kind of the style, the way that he played. Coming off screens a lot, and and he was a big fitness nut, and he was in really good shape for his time, and was a very efficient shooter and a great free throw shooter as well. So. Next, we have Bob Davies, who played in the NBA BAA from 49 to 55. He also had some years in the NBL in the mid 40s. 71 ranks. These are lower because of just the short time that he played. Relatively, the win shares 47th, PER 33rd, and win shares are 48th, 37th. He had 4 All NBA first teams with 1 tie. Again, we'll just give him the full one, even if it's technically a little bit less. And then 1 time on the second team. He was known as the Harrisburg Houdini, and he was basically Bob Cousy before Bob Cousy did what was then considered crazy ball handling, like behind the back dribbling. Was also his innovative passing, that sort of stuff, and had a lot of success. Obviously, not nearly as heralded as Bob Cousy, but he led the Royals to the 1951 NBA title. Also, led the Royals to the 46 NBL title, which I think I mentioned before, and 2 finals in the NBL. And was usually, I think the Royals would have been a even more accomplished team if it had not been for the fact that George Mikan was in the league and was basically winning almost every year, except for 1 year where he broke his leg and the Royals managed to win the championship that year. Pretty much until he retired, it was the Lakers every year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then finally, our last choice, another Celtic great, Sam Jones, 1971. Win shares was 14th all time, PR was 29th, and win shares for 48 was 15th. Was the least accomplished in terms of the all NBA teams, was only 3 times on the second team here. Again, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Oscar Robertson and Jerry West were in the league and were, and Sam didn't make all those lists just because of that, but he was obviously a great player and probably limited himself somewhat because he played on, the fact that the Celtics had so many options in terms of playing. And early on in his career, he was a reserve, behind Sharman and Cousy, even though he was just about as good as those players. And led and became even better than those players as his career advanced. Right,
it's just a big chunk of his career. He's the third best, or the third best guard and the 4th best player on the Celtics. And it's like, yeah, but those players are Bill Sharman and Bob Cousy and Bill Russell. So it's like not really a slight on him whatsoever. It just happens to be in some ways the right team because obviously the success and he was a great part of that huge success. But also in some ways maybe the wrong team in that if he had played for another team, you may have seen him have gaudier numbers and be regarded more as a leader and the best player on his team or whatnot, but I think he'd probably be okay with the way his career went and everything like that. So no, he definitely deserves to be on this list for sure.
So now we look at the other nominees, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the more obscure players, and the guys we talked about before will just give a cursory summary of their accomplishments. Our old friend Bob Feerick is first.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
The leader, the whole focal point, what you came for. You come for the Bill Russell, you stay for the Bob Feerick, though.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Well, no,
you come for Bob Feerick. You come for Bob Feerick and stay for Bob Feerick. You just want all the Bob Feerick stuff you can get. So.
Yeah, we really should have just made this exclusively Bob Feerick show. That really would have been a better idea in retrospect. But
coming soon.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. So, yes, as we mentioned, not in the Hall of Fame. It was a tragedy, of course. Played from 1947 1950. His 1971 ranks really only win shares applies because the others didn't really exist yet. 61st in win shares, which, for 4 years in the league, in 25 years, is pretty good. Twice on the first team, once on the second team, and Curtis Harris, our good friend from Pro Hoops history, wrote a good summary of Feerick's career. He actually did play in the NBL before going to the BA. We'll talk a little bit about that. But he and Red Auerbach actually had a close relationship while they were stationed at the Norfolk Naval Academy during World War II. And then Auerbach, once he joined the Washington Capitals, he was at that point coaching high school basketball in Washington, D.C., persuaded the owner of the Capitals to make him the new coach of the franchise in the BAA, and then he got together some of his old buddies from Norfolk, including Feerick and Fat Freddie Scolari, and they were a very strong team in the early days of the BAA, even though they did not win a championship. But Feerick had a strong career already with the Oshkosh All-Stars in the NBL. They made the finals of the it was not actually the NBL finals, but it was the finals of what was called the World Professional Basketball Tournament, which was a multi-league tournament that was really the most prestigious title at the time. Eventually, as the merger happened and the NBA established itself, that was no longer the case. But for a few years, there were teams from all over that went on that league. The Philadelphia Spas that we talked about earlier were joining in. Harlem Globetrotters, back when they were more a competitive team, went in. The Harlem Wrens, all the great teams of the time, independent and in leagues, were going on in that tournament. That's probably another topic we should delve into. We
should absolutely do it. And now I want that to happen. Now I want the champion of the NBA. I mean, obviously the NBA team would probably win, but I want the champion of the NBA team. I want FIBA. I want throw the G League in there if we want. Let's get
there you go.
I mean, let's see if the Santa Clara Warriors can beat the Golden State Warriors. I don't think they can, but I want to find out. So
I want to find out, absolutely. Right. So.
And I want to see if some one of the Real Madrid can take it to the Warriors. I want to see that. I want that right now. So
CSKA Moscow, can they beat the Warriors?
Right? Exactly. How incredible
the world wants to know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there might be some legality purposes. There might be a whole we don't want our contracted players playing in this stupid tournament thing, but I don't care. I want it.
Yeah. I think the NBA owners would want to see it. I think they would want to see it happen more than they care about their own investment.
Exactly. Right. I mean, if there's one thing NBA owners love is making fans happy, and they don't care if it loses them even a dime, as long as they make the old fans happy. So that's all that matters.
The only thing they love more than that, Bob Feerick.
Bob Feerick, of course.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. So speaking of Bob, as we mentioned, the Capitals very successful in the BAA. In fact, they were 49-11, which set a record for winning percentage that I think lasted until the Philadelphia 76ers beat it in 1967. Yes, I'm sorry. I give the 7 the 6, the 6 and the 7. Sometimes I have to think about that in my head. But anyway, Feerick was by far the team's leader in win shares and true shooting percentage. They were, however, upset by the Chicago Stags in the playoffs. That was a little weird because they were the two best teams in the league, and somehow they met in the first round. We don't need to talk anymore about that. But the BAA, not always the best run organization. They did, however, make the finals versus the Lakers in 1949. They lost in 6 games, and Feerick actually missed the series because of injury. Probably didn't. Maybe they would have won if he had been there. But anyway, he was briefly the Caps player coach in 1950 as the league became the NBA. Then he retired for pro basketball to coach his alma mater, Santa Clara. Then became the Warriors general manager from 63 to 74 and was put in the position of director of player personnel. I don't know how that's different from GM, but it was a different job anyway. He died in 1976, just a few years later, but he did help. His final piece of his legacy was helping put together the 1975 championship team. So yeah, there's Bob. Yep.
Bob Feerick. There he is.
Yep.
I wonder if being buddies with Red Auerbach may have helped him get on this list. I don't know. Just a thought.
It's possible.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
Just a thought. But no, he's still got a pretty decent career there. I don't.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm not trying to we're teasing about Bob, but yeah, I think it's fine. Yeah, he seems like a good nominee here. We're going to talk about a few guys who got left off, and there's probably one who I would have put ahead of him. But getting somebody who belonged in those early days, I think is good. It would have been nice to see if they could have found somebody from the NBL who would have kind of fit that criteria. Although some of the guys here, if you look from 46 to 49 in the NBL, I don't see an obvious guy who isn't on this list. Because some of those guys like Davies and such,
sure.
Should be there already. So I think they actually didn't really screw the NBL directly because of this list.
No, absolutely. And of course we have to remember too, it's 1971. So it's like the decisions are mostly made by a bunch of guys standing around a table smoking. I doubt they're let let me look at the stats. Like, hold on one sec. Let me,
right.
like, it's just a bunch of dudes smoking and drinking brandy and being like, yeah, I tell you that Bob Feerick, he was a hell of a player. And they're like, all right, sounds good to us. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I really don't think it was very intensive in terms of the, statistical, like, analysis of each one of these guys, in terms of how.
I'm guessing that we've put more work into it more than they did.
Yeah, I bet it was about 45 minutes until their cigars were out, and then they put the cigars down and said, hey, let's go to the bar, and then they went to the bar. And then that was it. So that was it. But, all right, we'll move on now. Harry Gallatin, 1949 to 1958. 1971, he ranked at 19th in win shares, 10th in PER, 14th in win shares per 48. So he's got a pretty good case here. Only one time, though, All-NBA first team, one time All-NBA second team. So you can see a lot of those, like, even though statistically he ranks pretty high or in the upper echelon for some of the things, didn't really pop up on too many All-NBA teams as well. Mostly because he's playing with some heavy competition in those eras for forward. So makes a lot of sense why he would be left out a little bit. Tom Gola as well, 1956 to 1966. 1971, he ranked 44th in win shares, 117th in PER, and 73rd in win shares per 48. Only one time made the All-NBA second team. And he doesn't have gaudy numbers like a lot of the others on the list, but he was really a valuable asset to the teams he played for, and you could see it by their success. He teamed with with Paul Arizin and Neil Johnston to lead the Warriors to an NBA championship in 1956. And he was an elite scorer in college, Tom Gola, but and we went to the Warriors, and he was with Arizin and Johnston. He changed into more of a defensive, passing, rebounder guy, kind of a Draymond Green type, in the sense that Draymond Green probably could score, 20 points a game if he really wanted to, but is more happy just being a defensive, passing, rebound guy and letting, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant and stuff do their work. And that's kind of how I see Gola as well. He was obviously capable of being a good scorer, but realized that Arizin and Johnson maybe were a little bit better, and he could fit a better role, as a defender, passer, and rebounder. So hurt some of his stats, but doesn't quite get there. But regardless of that, 1959-1960, Gola becomes the first Warrior to have 3 straight games with a triple-double. The only other, Draymond Green in 2016. So, of course, there's another example of how, in a lot of ways, he reminds me of a Draymond Green type, where he could do a little bit of everything on the court. Maybe not any one stat all that gaudy, but people that watched him and knew about him knew just how valuable he was to the team's success.
Yeah, and I think the Draymond Green is a good comparison, because I think that he was elite at being a glue guy, elite at being a role player. Some of the guys, like Dennis Rodman or there's a handful of players that we could think of who are the kind of guys who are able to be elite players without having that without showcasing that ability to score. As you said,
like a Ron Artest is one I always think of as well. I mean, he remember those Kings years, he was scoring like 23 a game or whatever. And then he goes to the Lakers and he scores 11 a game because he's like, I don't need to. I don't need to score. Like, I don't want to score. I want to defend and pass and rebound and do all that sort of stuff. So yeah, he capable of scoring 25 a game, but didn't really need to and would adapt to not doing that.
Absolutely, yeah. And then Rasheed Garen, who played most of his career with the Knicks and later with the Hawks. Was an elite scorer during his time. 1971 ranks, win shares was 26, PER was 46, and win shares of 48 was 61. 3 times on the second team. He was kind of dogged, I think, the fact that the teams that he played for generally for his career were not super successful. Although the late 60s Hawks, had some good moments, but he was stuck on the Knicks for a long time when the Knicks were not very good. He was known as their best, but he was a really tough-minded guy. Was one of those great characters from the 50s and 60s, the hard drinking types. Would later have some issues coaching Pete Maravich. Let's say had some issues getting through to him, but was a tough player in his day. Was also, I think, was well known for being disgusted with the fact that with the 100-point game from Wilt Chamberlain, because he was on the other side of this and felt that the Warriors did not play the game the right way, so to speak.
May have been trying to get Wilt that 100 points. Right. Just a thought that maybe they were trying to pass it to him and get it. But no clear. No, I don't know for sure, but it felt very much like they may have been in on this.
That might have been. Yeah, it's possible. Yes. So it subverted the game, I guess. It would be the way that he would have put it. But anyway. And then we got Tom Heinsohn, played from 57 to 65. Of course, one of the great Boston Celtics players. Another guy who, he was a prominent scorer for the team, although there was no one really, on the team who averaged a whole lot of points because they like to spread things around. So I think another guy who, in a sense, could have been like a 30-point scorer if he played for a different team because he had that ability, but he blended in a little bit more with the on the Celtics versus a different team that he would have had. But he was 37th in win shares in 1971, 39th in PER, and 35th in win shares per 48. So I think is more of a marginal guy on this list, although certainly was accomplished during his time.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, it seems like a good to be nominated, but not necessarily on the team itself. So I think I'm fine with where he's at and where his place is.
Exactly, yeah. And then a couple of guys from the 50s who I think are, were very elite during their time, but have sort of been, their effectiveness has kind of been forgotten off. And they were two big men. The first is Neil Johnston, played from 52 to 59 with the Warriors. His ranks in the league were 15th in win shares, 4th in PER, and 4th in win shares for 48, which, is obviously super high. He was 4-time on the first team, 1 time on the second team, and he played, at least the beginning of his career was playing while George Mikan was in the league, and then of course played with Bill Russell being in the league. So the fact that he was able to be on all those All NBA teams despite you playing with those guys, I think says something right there.
No, absolutely, yeah, and gaudy numbers. I mean, led the league in scoring a few times. I mean, definitely a guy that you look at overall. He doesn't. I don't know if he's regarded as being one of the kind of the all-time greats or one of the greats of this era, but probably should be. I mean, he's really got the stats to back it up and some of the success to back it up too. I mean, a lot of All-Star games in a row as well, just overshadowed by a few other guys in the league. But yeah, shouldn't really be anything taken away from him. I mean, had a really, really great career.
Right, and part of that team, the Warriors team that won the '56 title, and had some good success. So absolutely. And then the other guy talking about Edie Mccauley, played from 50 to 59, and mostly with the Celtics, although ended his career with the Hawks, was part of the Bill Russell trade. His ranks in 71, 12th in win shares, 15th in PER, and 9th in win shares for 48. So top 10 guy based on that ranking. Third on the 3 times on the first team, 1 time on the second team, and probably when he was traded, he had been the best player in Celtics history, and he was definitely more of an offensive minded player than a defensive minded player. And obviously, once they brought Bill Russell in, it completely changed the what the Celtics were able to do. But he shouldn't necessarily suffer because he wasn't as good as Bill Russell. I mean,
right? That's a hard thing to follow. Yeah. Yes, yeah, unfortunately.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Move on now. Slater Martin, a guard from 1950 to 1960. 1971 ranks 54th in win shares, 208th in PR, and 127th in win shares per 48. 5-time made the all-second team. Some of those stats might not reflect what he was, and he was one of the best defensive players in the NBA in the 50s. He won 4 titles between 1950 and 54 with the Lakers. 1956, he joined the St. Louis Hawks and helped them, alongside Bob Pettit, of course, win the 1958 NBA title. Never a dynamic scorer and didn't rack up really gaudy numbers, but success is obviously there with the titles with Minneapolis and the titles with St. Louis. Career high 13.8 points per game in 1955, and then a career high assist per game was 6.2 in 1956. So good numbers, but not great. And the playoff numbers across the board, I thought this was interesting as well. If you look at all of them rise, like his points rise, his assist rise, everything goes up in the playoffs, and it just kind of leads, I think, in a lot of ways to the success that all of his teams sort of saw in the playoffs as well. So yeah, he's a guy who, the numbers don't really reflect it, but the team success, and him being a part of that success definitely probably puts him on this list as well. Dick McGuire, another guard here, same era as well, 1950 to 1960, 46th in win shares, 79th in win PR, and 71st, I should say, in win shares per 48. One time made the All-NBA second team, and he led the league in assists during his rookie season with a then record 386 assists, and then of course made the NBA All-Star team 7 times, 1951, 52, 54, 55, 56, 58, and 59. So definitely had was definitely one of the better guards of his era. Stats, again, like across the board stats don't really show it, but yeah, great passer, good defender, and then obviously enough to make the All-Star team as many times as he did as well. Just maybe not top tier of this list, but definitely a good contributor.
Yeah, and then probably also put on the list just to make Ned Irish happy,
right?
Yeah, no, I mean, and he was a very, and he was not only as a player, but for the Knicks for a long time in various roles, in front office roles, and scout roles, and coaching roles. Was a was part of that franchise, so an important part of the franchise, and was part of the teams that made the finals 3 years in a row. That did not win a championship, but were obviously successful in the early days of the league. And I think Martin and McGuire both kind of fit that mold of the numbers aren't great, but they certainly you can look at their reputation and you can see that they had lot to offer, and it was a little bit harder for guards to amass some of the impressive stats during the time. And you talked about Slater Martin's career assist average was only 6.2, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it wasn't really until Cousy, and this was I think even more in the mid 50s, where there were not guys who were getting like 10 assists per game up until really the more into the late 50s or so,
right?
When the pace started to increase. I mean, that was obviously a huge part of it. So, and I think they were a little bit more conservative about issuing assists up until like the 50s and 60s, and guys started to approach that level more often. Oscar obviously being another one of those. So the stuff that we rate guards on, point guards especially on now was not the same in the 50s. So
absolutely no, it's a big part, and also we mentioned a little bit earlier, but the whole propensity of not making shots, and there was a lot of people not making shots at this time. So obviously it's hard to get an assist if the guy you pass to misses the shot and gets his own rebound and puts it up, then you're not getting the assist. And as you said, in a lot of ways, now you'll see some assists now where like a guy dribbles 5 times, they still give the assist to a dude or whatever, which is a little much. Whereas those days it felt like it was a little more, if you didn't directly relate, your pass wasn't directly related to the score, they're not going to count it. So yeah, it's always kind of tough to look at the stats. So for him to do as well as he did in that number, I think it definitely reflects how great he was.
Yeah. And a couple other guys, a couple guys from the Lakers dynasty of the early 50s. First, Vern Mickelson. 1971, his ranks were 17th in win shares, 30th in PER, 21st in win shares per 48, 4 times on the all-second team. He was, of course, the tough, rugged forward of that team. And it was sort of known for his being really physical, for his defensive play, for setting screens, but also was a offensive stalwart on that team, along with perfect guy to pair with George Mikan, and then Jim Pollard, who was the numbers aren't quite as impressive. The 1971 ranks, he was 80th in win shares, 80th in PER, 113th in win shares for 48. Played in the NBA from 49 to 55. Twice on the first team, twice on the second team, but he was he was a great leaper of his day. Was definitely an important glue guy for that Lakers team. And even if the stats aren't quite there for him, I think he definitely belongs as a part of one of the 2 most important dynasties the league had seen during that time.
Absolutely, for sure.
And then we have Amory Stokes, and this is one where he only played for 3 seasons, 1956 to 1958. He was listed as a center for 1 season and a power forward for 2 seasons, although he was only listed at 6'7". And the 1971 ranks aren't really that helpful, but we'll list them anyway. Win shares 160th, PER was 12th, which is interesting, and then win shares 48 is 103rd. 3 times on the all second team for the league, and he's best known as one of the NBA's greatest tragedies. His Hall of Fame career was cut, far too short. And one of the guys you thought would have, what he would become. His career averages were 16.4 points per game, 17.3 rebounds per game, 5.3 assists per game. Look at a guy like, Anthony Davis, or even like an early version of LeBron as one of these like do everything players who was, had tremendous size, but also could have, could race down the court and, was great ball handler, great rebounder, very good scorer. I think the only thing that really was a low mark on him is his shooting percentage wasn't very strong, but obviously he was early on in the league. That definitely could have improved. And that was improving across the board as the league, evolved into the late 50s and early 60s. But, you imagine him with Oscar Robertson, and how great those Royals team could have been if it hadn't been for the tragedy that befell him. Yeah,
it is awful because you look at the stats and you look at the numbers and you look at everything and go, oh man, this guy was like right on the cusp of being like an all-time. I mean, that's 16.4 points per game and 17.3 rebounds per game. I mean, it's just nuts stats. But it's just obviously one of the great tragedies in NBA history, unfortunately.
And then next is Bobby Wanzer, played from 48 to 57. His ranks in win shares was 33rd. PER was 47th, and win shares for 48 was 30th. 3 times on the second team. He's another guy who's more, kind of a glue guy type as opposed to a, really good stats type. But in 52, he was the first player to ever shoot over 90% from the free throw line in a season. It's been done 163 times since, but he got there first. So, and was another guy who was part of those really good Royals teams with Bob Davies and all those, and Arnie Rison and all those other guys from the mid 40s to the mid 50s. So, and what was on the 51 championship team.
George Yardley here, 1954 to 1960. He ranked 38th in win shares, 14th in PR, 20th in win shares per 48. So pretty high up there in PR and win shares per 48. One-time All-NBA first team, one-time All-NBA second team. Led the Pistons to back-to-back finals in 1955 and 56. Nicknamed Bird, he had a relatively short career, but was an elite scorer. The first to score more than 2,000 points in a season. Also known for his, quote, flamboyant play, which was probably just the fact that he shot off the dribble and had a quick first step, but that at that time was very flamboyant. And he said that Yardley said at one point that Arizin and he were the only guys who took their jump shots at the apex of their jump instead of shooting while on the way up. So kind of interesting that he, in some ways, may have perfected the jump shot a little bit the way as we know it. But yeah, that's George Yardley for you. But yeah, what do you make of his flamboyant play?
Yeah, right. I don't know. It might be a little bit too flamboyant for me. I want to dial it down a little bit. Yeah. I mean, what's this jumping stuff? I don't know. I don't really believe in jumping in basketball. I believe you stay on your feet, you stay with your man, you put your hands up, you just, you play the right way.
See, I try to do that when I go to parks, and like nobody else wants to do it, and then I just keep getting blocked and stuff, and it's really stupid because I'm like, guys, no, stop playing flamboyantly. Like,
you're not supposed to jump.
Yeah, just stay on the ground.
Stop
then
jumping.
We're all equal. It's much better.
James Naismith did not. He was not in favor of jumping, so why would I be
exactly
in favor
right?
of jumping?
I follow Naismith rules to a T, so I don't know why these other know what these other kids are doing out there. But,
yes, yeah. Yes, I use I use leather ball.
Yeah,
I don't believe in dribbling. You stand and you pass.
Yeah, and I shove guys into cages too, and they're always like, "What the hell are you doing?" Like,
yes,
hey,
absolutely.
Look,
I don't know.
Play ball. We're playing ball. Let's do it. Let's go.
Absolutely. So, and then we have our final player on this list, Max ZaslofskyThe, played from 47 to 56. He is not in the Hall of Fame, and I think has a very strong case to be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, he does. Kind of strange here.
Yeah. 1971 ranks. He was 50th in win shares and 149th in PER, 205th in win shares for 48. But again, was only really the last part of his career where those last two stats cover. So it's not really a good valuation for him. 4 times on the first team. He was actually the youngest player on a league first team until at age 21, until LeBron James joined the league too. So that's pretty good company right there. He spent 2 years in the Navy during World War II, and then only 1 year at St. John's before leaving for the pros for the Chicago Stags. So not playing all 4 years in college.
Controversial. Yeah, that's why he's not in the Hall of Fame, because he's
there you go.
busting through the ranks here. Yeah, that's probably right.
Bucking tradition. Yeah, and then he led the Stags to the BAA Finals in 47 versus Joe Fulks and the Warriors. Of course, the Warriors won that championships we talked about before, and then led the league in scoring in 1948. In fact, was the youngest in league history to lead in scoring until Kevin Durant. So another pretty good company for him. At the time when he retired at 56, he was the 3rd all-time leading scorer considering the BAA and the NBA combined, behind Mikan and Fulks, and was a member of the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame and the New York City Basketball Hall of Fame. He passed away in 1985 at age 59 due to complications from leukemia. Was part he kind of bounced around a little bit in terms of the teams that he played for. He eventually played for the Stags. He also joined the Knicks during the middle of their run of NBA Finals appearances in the 50s, and I think played for a few other teams as well. But so maybe part of the fact that he's not in the Hall of Fame is he's not necessarily established with one team. He kind of was a little bit of a journeyman later in his career, but absolutely for a while at least was certainly one of the elite players of his time.
Absolutely. No, yeah, it's kind of strange that I feel like he should be in the Hall of Fame, but I like that. I like the number of being the youngest first teamer at age 21. I mean, and also like breaking the ranks of college, because screw college basketball. We're an NBA podcast here, so I'm all for Max breaking the lines here. But yeah, it's pretty interesting that he's not in there, because it feels like he did accomplish quite a few things. But yeah,
yes,
whatever.
And he was in a relatively minor role, but he also was part of the Fort Wayne Pistons finals appearances in 55 and in 56. I don't think he actually played in the 56 series, but that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 finals appearances during his career, which that's pretty good.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been pretty high up there. If for anyone who was not a Minneapolis Laker at the time, that would certainly have been up until the Celtics dynasty. Of course, that would have been probably the most in the league. So he was on some winners. That's for sure. A few guys who are worth considering. We don't need to delve too deeply in them because I think there's only really one who I think would have been an obvious snub, and that's the first guy we're going to talk about. Cliff Hagan was a two-time second-team All-NBA, and looking at his rankings, I think it says it the most. At win shares, he was 21st. PER, he was 20th. Win shares 48, he was 26th. He had been a long-time St. Louis Hawk, one of the great players along with Bob Pettit, of course. And it was part of their great, their stout front line. It definitely has the numbers to back it up. I was wondering if it was possible that he was maybe a victim of ABA NBA politics, where he was he had jumped. I guess he hadn't jumped because I think he technically retired in between, but he went to the ABA as a player coach with the Dallas Chaparrals. I don't think he was no longer in the ABA when this was actually created. I don't know if he had. If there's anything to that, but as you mentioned here in the notes, there were other guys, including George Mikan, who had ABA affiliations and were not snubs here, like Bill Sharman or whatever. So
it's true. I mean, Mikan was the goddamn commissioner of the ABA.
Right.
I feel like,
yeah, it's not like you can leave George Mikan off the list. I mean,
I get it. But I don't think you can lift Cliff Hagan off the list. I mean, really, if you look at those numbers, I suppose you could, and I suppose you could just say I just barely missed it. But I mean, some of the names we mentioned here, I think Cliff Hagan's better than a lot of them. So yeah, it's just it's very strange. I don't know. Yeah, he must have not picked up bar tabs, I think is the one we're finding out.
Well, right, there you go.
He must have been cheap or something.
And I think personality-wise, he was a little bit, certainly on the court, he was known for being just like really crazy and insane and getting into fights and, and making people mad. So yeah, I think off the court he had a better personality, but maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. Again, this was something where I tried to look for, and maybe I didn't mention this, but I tried to sort of look to see what anything was written about this at the time or really subsequently in terms of the politics behind this, because I think they must be fascinating, but we couldn't really find anything about it. So we're only able to speculate here, which is fun, but it would be nice to have some idea of what was going on there.
Yeah, we couldn't find much, so who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? So if anyone does know, wants to let us know, you of course can. We'll give you where you can reach us at the end of the show. It's the usual places. So anyway, the other guys who were on here, Jack Twyman, Larry Faust, another guy who definitely belongs in the Hall of Fame, is not in the Hall of Fame. Clyde Levalette, Arnie Rison, Carl Braun, who I think would all kind of be guys who have all all NBA or BA appearances, who I think would have a case to be on here. But I can't really say any of them particularly have stronger cases than anyone who wasn't included.
Yeah, no, all these guys. I mean, yeah, there's obviously the Hagan is the one. Twyman, I guess you could sort of make a case for. Faust, you can kind of, but yeah, the rest of the guys, I'm fine with where they probably ended up and them being left out. It's hard when you're trying to make this team. I mean, there's going to be snubs, obviously, guys that deserve it. So I think they did otherwise a pretty decent job, other than maybe one or two guys.
Yeah, no, and even the one or two guys, you can totally see why they.
Oh, sure,
yeah, it's not like it's they did a pretty good job here. The experts in the guys who were lifers for the league, yeah, they actually did a pretty good job, even if they probably spent 45 minutes on it and then went to the bar.
Yeah, but that's they're smart people, so
yeah,
it only took them 45.
So we'll wrap it up here with our selections. Who would have been our starting five for our silver anniversary team? If we have to go with the players that they picked out of the 25 selections, who would we have chosen for this team?
So my starting lineup, if we have to kind of stay strictly positional right now, I had Sam Jones as one of my guards. I had Bill Sharman as the other, Dolph Schayes, Bob Pettit, and Bill Russell. So it went a little weird there without a pure point guard, but Jones could deal with it. He's fine. He can handle the ball there. But I went Jones, Sharman, Schayes, Pettit, and Russell as my five.
Yes, and I had a similar list. I went with Cousy. I went with traditional point guard. I think just 10 times all NBA and that MVP. I think I think puts him on there. Then I went with Sam Jones as my other guard. Then I copied you with Schayes, Pettit, and Russell for my front line.
That seems like the obvious. I mean, that Schayes, Pettit, Russell. It's hard to make an argument for any of those other. I mean, those dudes were great, and it seems pretty tough. Without maybe you can make a Mikan case, but not over Russell.
Not over Russell.
Right.
No. Yeah, and I think the toughest call there is between Jones and Sharman. And I went with Jones slightly over Sharman, but it's extremely close. You could definitely call either way. I totally get your logic in Jones and Sharman, but I do think Cousy just I do think he was more accomplished than either of those guys, even if
for sure
you look at some of the more advanced stats and maybe he's a little bit overrated in terms of that, but still I think he belongs there. If I could go positionless, then I would actually probably go with Russell, Mikan, Pettit, and Schayes, and then either Cousy or Arizin as my fifth guy, depending on depending. And then that, of course, you wouldn't really have any guard, and that would kind of be a problem. So I probably could have at least one guard going on
sure.
there. But that's that would probably be my choice there. All right, well, I think that's about it. Thanks, everyone, for checking us out. And, of course, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Over and Back NBA. You can leave us a review on iTunes. We've got some recent ratings, at least, on iTunes, but we'd love some more. Those 5-star reviews really help us out. And you can also, if you can listen to us on pretty much any podcasting platform. We are there. If we're not there, you can let us know, and we'll make sure that we're added there. But although we usually like the iTunes, or I guess it's Apple Podcast now. I always forget to call it Apple Podcast.
Yeah, it is.
But
they've rebranded. I think Google Play is now just Google Podcast, or they keep rebranding this shit. Those weirdos. Come on.
All right. Well, you know where to go. You can find us. So anywhere you want to leave us a rating and review, we would greatly appreciate it. And any feedback you want to give us, we like hearing from you. We do this for our enjoyment, but also for other people's enjoyment. So if you're into what we're doing, just let us know, and we would do that. You can also find us at the Step Back, which is also fan-sided NBA. Speaking of rebranding, so you can find us easily there, and there's some always great stuff in the NBA season. They're great. Fast Break Breakfast is another great podcast that's there, and there's always some great stuff being written there. So you should check that out as well. So did I forget anything, Rich?
I think you got it. Yeah, we mentioned the Twitter, mentioned Facebook. You can follow us as well. But overandbackNBA.com will be kind of our hub, and then just find us wherever you can. And then if there is a podcast app that you use and you cannot find us, please let us know, and we will make sure we get on there, because it is pretty easy to get on there. But maybe I think we're on every single one, but if there's some random one that you and 5 of your buddies use, we'll make sure we get on there too. So just let us know at Over and Back NBA on Twitter, or Over and Back on Facebook. You can let us know as well, and we will get on there as soon as we can.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back soon.